Choice Hotels get you more of what you value. Here's a little tune to help you remember. Same drive, different day. Don't you wish you were getting away? Pack your bags and come on through. Texas, Ohio, Alaska, we're up there too. Comfort Inn, it's calling your name. Save on the stay. Oh, and free waffles are yours to claim. Well, I hope you like my little song. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Persephone and Cassandra, Atlas and Prometheus, oligarchy, plutocracy, satire, irony, hubris, nemesis, pathos, catharsis, sour grapes and blowing hot and cold, opening Pandora's box and leaving no stone unturned, the myths, tales and concepts of ancient Greece echo and reach into every aspect of modern life. Often misunderstood, frequently romanticized, and sometimes deliberately twisted. To understand their origins and truth is to get a real glimpse into the universal themes that connect us to the past and to each other. This is their story.
Άμα θέλεις μάνα, δίρε με. Άμα θέλεις μάνα, δίρε με. Πάλι εγώ θα βγαίνω στην αυλή για να βλέπω τον Αλεξανδρή.
Welcome to Podyssey. I'm Alexandrou. Each time we take one myth, one concept, person, place, theme from ancient Greece, we take it apart, figure out its inner workings, trace its tentacles, update, and put it back together, all shiny and new. But not this week. Look, you have to have known this was coming. How can a podcast called Podyssey not engage with Christopher Nolan's epic film, The Odyssey? But I wanted to make it special. So I have assembled a star team, including regular archaeologist Alexandra Ngilitaki-Rö, cultural historians Debbie Chalice and Amanda Potter, and, as a treat, film critic and season 1 regular Linda Marric. Now let me alleviate the tension and tell you we all loved the film, but that doesn't mean we loved it equally or loved it for the same reasons, or that we don't disagree with plenty of the artistic choices that were made, and with each other. We discussed every aspect of the film in a session that was almost as long as the film. And having just edited it, can I just say that if we could bottle this conversation and add it into the water supply, this would be a better world. Each of us respectfully agreed with each other on some stuff and disagreed on others. Never the same alliance twice. We listened properly and with respect. We did not assert our superior credentials or try to score points. No person behaved as if theirs was the right opinion to the exclusion of others. It was a genuine exchange of ideas, and we did not flinch from the difficult issues around the film. We convinced each other of some things and not others. A paragon of what a civilized human conversation can be. The antithesis of social media discourse. An antidote to the culture war's poison. I feel so proud of this little safe harbour that we have created. So pull into the dock and enjoy.
Tell me what you remember.
A wife? A son.
And then what?
We won the war. Help me go home.
This is a household waiting for master. I want you to choose me.
Ithaca's king is coming back.
No, he's not.
What would he do if he came back here and find all these suitors in his house?
You're pining for a daddy you didn't even know, like some sniveling bastard. Who's looking after your wife and son?
Do you see?
My dad is coming home. Bringing vengeance.
Bringing it all.
So, just to give you an idea of the voices you'll be hearing, although they will, I'm sure, be familiar to those of you who listen to the podcast, we have with us Amanda.
Hi, it's Amanda from the Open University here.
Okay, lovely. And Debbie.
Hi, it's Debbie here, up from up north.
Which is the centre of the world now, apparently, Debbie.
It totally is, very much. Always has been.
And we have Linda. Hello, Linda.
Hi, it's Linda from the very boring south.
And we have Alexandra from even further north, I think.
I'm Alexandra from the coldest country of the world, Norway.
Okay, very good. So, welcome to everyone. Like I said in the introduction, you knew we had to do this. A podcast that is called Podyssey had to review the Odyssey by Nolan, which is smashing box office records in the cinemas at the moment, but not without some controversy. So I thought we'd separate this conversation into three broad segments. We would do one bit on what we thought of it as a film. So we would take our sort of classics hat off for a moment, as it were, and just be normal moviegoers and say, what did we think of it as a freestanding film? How did it make us feel? And then we would look at the film more specifically as a telling of the Odyssey. And what did we think of that? How does it measure up in that way? And then in the final segment, we would look a little bit in the controversy that surrounds the film with respect to various casting choices, with respect to the non-inclusion of anyone Greek in the cast and things like that. And so that's the broad outline of the conversation. So who wants to tell me? I'm going to ask for Linda, as she is the qualified film critic among us. I will ask her to go last in this bit so that we don't feel intimidated by her more professional opinion. So can I ask Debbie, first of all, what did you think of the film?
As a film, I thought it was fantastic. It's a thriller in some ways. Although you know the story, there's so much in it. I mean, I definitely want to see it again. I saw it Sunday morning, and there's so much I definitely want to sort of get some of the things I'm sure I missed, even though I was captivated. And although it's long, very Christopher Nolan, honestly, the 3 hours that it almost is, didn't feel like 3 hours at all, actually. It is epic in every way, and with my classics head off, I just really enjoyed it as a film. I think it says a lot about contemporary America. I think it says a lot about some of the issues right now, politically. And it looks great. There's issues with how it looks, but we'll get to that, I think. But lots of issues being discussed. There's things like the fact you don't see Agamemnon's face, I think is amazing. He has this brute power that is so intimidating, and there's just things like that really, I think it just really worked well on.
I really did like the fact that Agamemnon was like 2 feet taller than everyone else, dressed in black, and you never saw his face. That was quite effective. I can reveal that Aleka has been to see it twice already. She went back yesterday. So Aleka, can I ask you what you thought about it as a film, as a freestanding piece of cinema?
Yes, I thought it was amazing. I really enjoyed it, but I went in with an open mind. I didn't go in as a Greek. I didn't go in as an archaeologist. I went in as a cinephile. And I really like Nolan. I really like the ambience he creates. And for me, the message was very strong. The message about what war brings to our lives as humans was very, very strong. And this double going back and forth to what actually happened in Troy and giving us this impression of it's not just an epos, it's not just the story of a man, it's about killing, raping, it's all the savage character, what a war brings. I thought it was marvelous because I've been to so many movies lately where you only have combat and no point. So I start to feel unease, in the
Yeah,
way
yeah.
that all of the war and the killing is presented. So I really liked his take on that.
Mm.
And it certainly brings people to the classics, because everybody wants to know which part was originally from the epic and which was not. And I have seen in different bookstores and stuff the Odyssey has been downloaded thousands of times
Oh,
the
that's
last week.
amazing. That's amazing. That's very pleasing to hear. How about you, Amanda? What did you think?
So I enjoyed it, but perhaps my experience was marred slightly in that I was very tired. I went with a friend as part of a weekend in London that started with a beer festival on Friday night. And then on Saturday morning, we walked up all the steps of St. Paul's Cathedral and were quite tired. And so I felt that the first third of the film, I was really struggling to keep my eyes open, as was my friend. And then I think once we got past the Cyclops bit and got into it, then I really, really enjoyed it, and so did my friend. So I think, I don't know whether it was the film was slow to start or I was just a bit tired, but clearly then I was really listening and looking, and the tiredness went away after about a third. And there's lots in it that I really enjoyed.
Amanda, can I ask you, are you a fan of Nolan in general? Do you like his non-linear telling of stories? Because, he's not for everyone. And I do know that his films create deliberate confusion at the start. Like they are deliberately difficult to follow, and you have to stick with them in order to begin to make sense of how it jumps back and forth, as it were. So, are you a big fan of Inception or Memento?
So I enjoyed them. I liked the Batman films. I can't say that they're my favorite films of all time, but I have enjoyed
Mm,
them.
mm.
So it
Yeah.
wasn't the back and forth. I do think I was skeptical about Matt Damon. I probably went in being skeptical. I keep thinking about him in The Duel and that awful thing where Jodie Comer never got to use a sword. And I'd just been writing something about that. And maybe I went in with some preconceptions about the casting and how it was going to be. So I think that with the tiredness. But as I say, once I got into it, and I really liked Anne Hathaway, I thought she was very good. A few things I found jarring. Like I was thinking, would a prince really go, Mum this, Mum that? And I was thinking about Charles and the Queen, and would they speak to each other that familiarly, thinking about the royal household? Or maybe they would.
Yes, that's so strange because I also thought it took me a few times to get used to the idea that he was calling them mum and dad rather than mother and father, which would be the more normal way, I guess, in something classic or costume that you would refer to your parents, especially if you were a royal. I did find it quite jarring the first couple of times when he said dad
Yeah.
rather than father. Okay, so Linda, as the professional film watcher among us, and I know a huge fan of Nolan, this really is where the beginning of his career meets the present of his career, isn't it? Because I thought the storytelling, it really reflected Memento in a way. It was about someone who kept going back and remembering a few more details, a little bit longer of the fragments of memory that he had lost. And I thought it worked very effectively for the telling of the Odyssey because it basically peppered it with the story as it had happened and sort of shared the confusion of the main character with the audience. So, what did you make of it as a big Nolan aficionado, I guess?
I am a massive, massive Christopher Nolan fan, and not just, I really love all of his films equally, even those that don't really leave as much of an effect or haven't left as much of an effect on me straight away. I've gone back and watched them again, and I find them, I have things to take away from them all. So for me, this was just extraordinary. I know that people are calling it his best movie ever. I don't know if it's his best movie because I really love The Prestige. I think that is a really underrated movie. And I still think The Prestige, especially sort of the character wise, is written so beautifully.
Mm.
I thought this was done so well. Everything about it was really well done. I think it's a very Hollywoodian telling of the Odyssey. And I know that people have an issue with that. I don't have an issue with that. I think he was in this, he was trying to emulate films like Ulysses from the 50s. You know, he was trying to emulate the movies that he grew up on or grew up like watching at home, probably at Christmas, like the rest of us, you know, Jason and the Argonauts, all the Cinecittà sort of retellings of those, you know, the Dino De Laurentiis movies. And I felt like he really did a fabulous job. And I know some people have had an issue with the language, but the language is very much close to what Hollywood was doing then, which is making a movie that is very sort of mainstream, that people can. I think people was the mainstream. I'd say, you know, Nolan wants his film to be seen by as many people as possible, and that is happening, which is absolutely brilliant. And I think one way of doing it is by simplifying the language and simplifying, not dumbing down, but simplifying the language to allow everywhere in the world to sort of access this story. And even if you are a hardcore classicist and hardcore sort of Odyssey aficionado, you really have to admire that, him trying to invite everyone into to talk about this or to watch this or to know the story, and this really old story.
I have no issue with him making it into a summer blockbuster. I think actually good on you if you can create this kind of beautiful cinema and make loads of money out of it so that companies then back more projects like this and make more of this kind of cinema that attracts people to things like the Odyssey, then absolutely good on you. I think Debbie told me something about the language of the film and the translation that was used, because that was in itself a little controversial at the time, wasn't it, Debbie?
Yeah, it's based on the translation by Emily Wilson of the Odyssey, which came out, I think it was 2019. And she's the first woman to translate the Odyssey from Greek to English anyway. And that caused, she used contemporary language in the translation. And people found that quite jarring when it came out. I mean, I actually enjoy it. I think it's a little bit like the film. It's jarring at first, but then you get used to it. I was doing a slow reading actually of women in the Odyssey at the Portico, and there was a section where people were, I'm not quite sure about that word, and I said, yeah, that's part of the controversy about the translation. So it is noticed. But he went with her translation because I think she does bring it alive. She writes actually about translating the Odyssey, and there's a book called Crossing the Wine Dark Sea. And there's a whole chapter in there on translations of the Odyssey. And having looked through some at the Portico, you know, like ones like Chapman, who was, you know, the first English translation, every translator brings something of themselves and their age, just like every film does. But there's something about the language that, you know, I think she does get the scene right. And she's quite sparing in her language. And she goes back to the Greek. She tries not to bring ethical attitudes to it. So there's one section just to say that it's not in the film, but when the handmaids or the female slaves are hung at the end, they're described in one translation as sluts. There's no Greek word for that in the Odyssey. That's just completely a sort of moral,
that's so interesting,
or ethical sort of thing taken by a translator. So she doesn't use that, and she actually draws attention to the fact that in the Greek, they're seen as piteously, they're seen as much victims of the war as all the people who died.
So moving beyond the director's vision, as an actor, obviously, I have to make a little stop and ask you what performances impressed you. So, you know, who brought a character to life in a way that took you by surprise, perhaps, or that had an impact that you didn't expect? Let's go the other way around, and I'll start with Linda this time.
Without a single doubt, Samantha Morton as Cersei. She is absolutely phenomenal. It is only a section of the movie. Really, I mean, if you compare how long the movie is and how long she's actually on screen, she just steals. For me, she's the most memorable thing out of the movie, and her performance is just incredible. And I foresee tons and tons of nominations for her come award season. For me, Cersei in here, she's not just a witch. She's not just a sorceress. She is kind of like a really angry feminist woman who has had it with men turning up at her door, expecting to be fed, expecting to be taken care of, and expecting, in the Odyssey, it's a palace, really, but in the film, it's just this little shack on this island. But yes, Cersei in here is someone extremely powerful, but she's also been blinded by anger, her rightful anger at being treated badly by pretty much everyone around her. And I just thought that performance was just incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that in the original, of course, Odysseus sleeps with Cersei, as he sleeps with pretty much everyone he comes across, to be honest. That aspect of it didn't really pop. Alexandra, how about you? Which performance did you particularly love?
I think I agree with Linda. Cersei really stood out, really talked about the women in that film and the epic itself. I would expect more from the other characters and maybe just go the other way around. The whole movie was based on the performance of the main character, and the women were just shades in a way. Penelope, the girl that was supposed to be Athena, or I'm not sure if it was, and the worst of all, sorry to say, it was Calypso. I mean, so I agree with Linda.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that had to do with Nolan himself and how he decided to instruct them or whatever.
Yeah, I have to say, I thought Charlize Theron was maybe the weak link in the whole ensemble. Maybe not her fault, but the whole being in the dreamy segment of the film made her a little wispy and breathless and insubstantial in a strange way that I don't think is actually there in the character proper. How about you, Debbie?
I think Anne Hathaway as Penelope really, again, there was a kind of controlled fury that she really channeled. And I think that sort of section when Telemachus says, I could take the throne. And she's like, who do you think's been sitting on the throne for 20 years? She's been running it all. And, done pretty well, really. I mean, she's had all these suitors and there hasn't been a war in Ithaca. She's kind of managed to keep it going. Her performance for me stood out. I wasn't that bothered by Telemachus. I suspect my daughter would be more interested. But yeah, I thought Robert Pattinson was just a bit hammy as the kind of villainous suitor.
Although I was glad to see him as a villain, because I always thought he had a villain's face, and I could never understand how he could be cast as the romantic lead. So I'm glad to see him make the transition to playing nasty people, because I think it suits him better.
But then you see, I think Twilight, he's a nasty person in that. Genuinely, I've never understood the Twilight obsession. Yeah, so for me, Penelope, I mean, I did also like Helen and Clytemnestra. I thought it's understated. I wish she'd had more screen time, honestly.
Yeah.
Because I think when you saw her, she was amazing.
Yeah, I agree. It was a great performance. She stole the scenes that she was in. I know, Linda, you had thoughts about Anne Hathaway, didn't you?
Often when you cast these really well-known Hollywood actresses in big epics, classic sort of stories, you are often taken out by how modern they look. You often get them, the haircut is a bit too much and they've had some work done, not to criticize anyone, but I just felt with Anne Hathaway that she really looked like she belonged to the era. I thought that performance was just so beautiful and so natural. I don't think it's a big enough role to warrant her being more memorable than Samantha Morton. I think Samantha Morton had more of an impact, but I thought Anne Hathaway did such a fabulous job because she just looked like she belonged to that era. She just looked like she had done her homework, and she just felt like someone who's been besieged by these suitors, and she just wanted them out of her home. I thought that performance was just great.
She's the only one that actually felt royal among them.
Yeah.
And I hope that was a deliberate choice, because as we have discussed on the podcast many, many times, there is a very reasonable school of thought that thinks the royal line passed down the woman side. And that's precisely the reason why she has suitors vying for her hand. If they could just take the throne, they would have just taken the throne. But they can't just take the throne. They need the queen because the royal line travels through her. And that's why they have to, for 20 years, try to woo her. And I thought that was quite a nice touch, that she was, in a way, the only one that showed royalty among all of them.
I also really, really loved her standing up to even her son, saying, I am enough. I know you just want these people gone because you want to take over from me, but I am the queen. I'm still the head of this family, of this place. I just thought that was really well written.
If data management is slowing down your business, you need the Intuit ERP. If one entity is here, and one here, and one here, and one here, you need the Intuit ERP. If scaling your business feels like starting over, you need the Intuit ERP. Intuit Enterprise Suite is the AI-native ERP solution that consolidates, migrates, and automates, all in one place. Learn more at intuit.com/ERP.
I got a call saying Chris wanted to meet with me about what we don't know. And I went over to his office and he shared, some more information about what project he was doing. And then he revealed that he wanted me to play these two iconic roles. And he said, I'd like you to read the script first and let me know whether you'd be interested in doing it. And I was like, I don't need to read the script. It's a yes. Mm-hmm. And then he said, no, please read the script. And so I sat in his office and read the script over a number of hours. And when I was done, I was like, my answer is still the same. When you're told you're going to play Helen of Troy, all you really hear about Helen is how beautiful she was. And that's not a character. Okay, how am I going to play beautiful? Who is the woman beyond the face? I really wanted to find her humanity, find what she's about. And this movie is a lot about the cost of war. He doesn't shy away from it. It's really an examination of the cost of war and those who went and those who stayed.
I'm surprised at the lack of love for the men in the film. I thought actually Matt Damon did a decent job at the center of the movie in a very difficult and in a way thankless part, because Odysseus is not a fantastically sympathetic character in many ways. And I thought the standout performance, in my view, was John Leguizamo as Evmeus, the sort of blind servant that stays loyal to Odysseus all these years and creates problems for the suitors. I found his performance just really, really touching, actually, especially in combination with Argos the dog, and that moment that is so famous in the poem of the Odyssey, of Odysseus coming back and the dog recognizing him, wagging his tail one time and then dying, which is exactly as it is in the poem. I just thought they created the emotional heart, in a way, of what was going on back in Ithaca, because Penelope and Telemachus and the suitors were in a way preoccupied with court intrigue, and he was the one whose heart genuinely ached for the return of Odysseus, which I found quite interesting, that it should be an unrelated servant that in a way loved Odysseus most purely than all of them. How about you, Amanda? Which performance jumped out at you?
So I, like Debbie, really thought that Anne Hathaway's performance was good, because Penelope, for me, she's just so annoying in the Odyssey, and she doesn't really, I just always want her to do more, and Anne Hathaway kind of brought that to it. I think we've already talked about her being regal, but she says the right things, and at the end she gets to go away with Odysseus, so she becomes the person that has the voyage. I just want to add a little bit about Samantha Morton. I think her performance was amazing, but I hated that Cersei, because I am a bit of a Cersei fan. I have written a young adult novel that's called Nausicaa's Odyssey, that's about reclaiming the female monsters from the Odyssey. And I just think that she lost a bit of her power. Yes, she was a great character, but what Cersei didn't get to do was to advise Odysseus on what was coming next. So the Sirens and Scylla and Charybdis, that was given to Tiresias. she wasn't beautiful. She wasn't the lover of Odysseus. And for me, I felt like she lost a bit of her power. And of course, we had no Nausicaa at all. So some of my favourite characters were not what I expected. And I realised that's just because of knowing the Odyssey. So going in thinking I'm not going to like Matt Damon, actually, I think he did a really good job and was convincing, because Odysseus isn't a very nice person. And we saw him go on his journey from being violent and self-realization that actually this isn't the way to be. But I think apart from Penelope, I didn't find the female characters did very much for me.
I think the central conceit of the film was very successful, and I thought it reflected the spirit of the original very well, which was that the reason for the journey, the reason Odysseus was not allowed to return home, is because he had been spoiled by war, is because he had been sullied by the experience of war and by his part in it. So he wasn't clean enough to come back to a domestic life. And we saw what happens when people did come back to a domestic life, like Agamemnon. They paid for it in different ways. So in many ways, Agamemnon and Odysseus represent the two different paths. You can either go back to your home life straight away, but it won't be what you expected. It will be as violent as what you left behind. Or you can go through a process of purgatory in a way. Now, this takes us into the second part of this conversation, which is how does the original compared to what we saw on the screen, which is a slightly different assessment. And I'm not a purist. I love the film The Name of the Rose. So I like it when filmmakers take liberties with the original material, because what works as an epic poem or a book or a novel is different to what works on the screen. If you had tried to put a detailed philosophical discussion about life and death on the screen and make a film of the Name of the Rose, it would have been interminable and unwatchable. But if you make it into a detective story about the serial killer, it becomes something different, but something very cinematic. And so I don't have that, don't touch the original source, you have to be as faithful as possible at all. But there were certain differences. Obviously, there was too much story for one film, so some things had to be condensed, some things had to be left out. And I know that Alexandra was talking to me a couple of days ago about what our expectations are of the characters as we go into the Odyssey, depending on exactly what we know and how much we know about the original.
I will take it from the Penelope that we just discussed, because I think it has to do with the expectations that one has after having a relationship, a personal relationship to the poem. Because we all have read it. I read it when I was a child. So I was thinking that it struck me that we have this different approach to Penelope, because for me, Penelope should be even more grand, more of a queen, and more the one that decided everything. So I think it has to do with expectations, like Amanda said about Circe and all of that. And what you said about Evmaeus, I thought that Evmaeus represented, in a way, the voice of the whole epic poem, the way I picture it from when I read it as a child. But for example, if you think about the Polyphemus, when I read it, we were pretty young, and we would read the poems of in children's books. But later, when
Which
I
had
was
an illustration. So
which had
instantly
illustrations,
we
yeah,
have an image of it, yes.
exactly. So that brings something that we carry with us. But then I also remember when I was 16 and I actually read the whole poem at school, and I was asked to picture Polyphemus. It would be something totally different than what Nolan presented. so but still, as I said in the beginning, I went in because I wanted to see what Nolan would create. So for me, what Nolan created was his own maybe memory of being a child and reading about Odyssey, and he brought up the elements and the characters that he wanted to stress on.
That's interesting. That's interesting, because I remember, obviously, Alexandra and I are siblings. So I first read the story of the Odyssey probably in the same book with the same illustrations that we had at home. And I remember the Cyclops Polyphemus very, very clearly being like a giant version of a farmer. He was hairy and had one eye, yes, but he was wearing clothes, and the inside of the cave basically looked like a little cottage. And so he wasn't this monstrosity that was depicted. But I thought that really worked in the film, so I didn't have an issue with it. And there were other aspects of it, like, for instance, Charybdis, which was exactly as I had pictured it as a child. This kind of many-headed, eyeless snake thing just picking people off the ship that worked really well as a piece of horror. So can I ask then, can I go round and start with Debbie this time and ask, compared to your expectations, knowing the original very well, what aspects of the film did you think worked particularly, and what aspects of the film did you think left something to be desired?
So I actually think the journey of Odysseus worked really well. This kind of sort of self-knowledge that he comes to works really well. I mean, Emily Wilson translates the beginning as, tell me he's of a complicated man rather than much travelled. And I think I really like that translation of a complicated man. I think his relationship with his crew worked really well, actually, because it's not like Jason and the Argonauts. They don't get on. There's often disagreements in the Odyssey. And the fall of the Bronze Age was also because, during times of famine, actually the working people rose up against the kind of aristocracy. So that sense of that kind of mutinous sense, and he's leading them down all these things that I thought that worked really well.
And I loved the idea that the hint, it was never explicitly really said, but given how much in the last 2 or 3 episodes of the podcast, we've talked about these mysterious sea people who were raiding places in Greece, I loved the little hint that maybe they were the sea people going around from island to island, breaking all the rules and causing havoc.
Exactly.
Where how this rumor started. It was like an expanded version of that Mitchell and Webb skit, with the Nazis where they go, "Are we the bad
guys?" Yeah. No, I mean, I thought, and again, I thought that was really well done. Again, that is in tune with current thinking around the fall of the Bronze Age. That it's not just one thing; there's multiple factors, and there's always been this sort of discussion about who are the sea people, and sometimes they have been thought of as Mycenaeans or Greek. So on that aspect, I felt the actual journey itself was done well. It's the women, if I'm honest. It's the lack of sex, definitely. And I know I'm always the one who goes on about it. But, that is such an important part of ancient Greek culture. Both Calypso and Circe invite him to sleep with them. I mean, you don't say no to a goddess, do you? And with Calypso, she was by far, for me, the weakest part of the film. And again, I don't think it's necessarily anything to do with the actress's acting or anything like that so much as just the role. Whereas, in the Odyssey, there's a fantastic bit, and again, we did this with the group at the Podyssey, of this moment where she says, well, of course, you can go back to Penelope, but she's never going to be as beautiful as me. And it says, Odysseus thinks very carefully before he answers, because he's not going to say, he's not going to say. And it's quite funny. There's bits in the Odyssey that are actually quite funny. You're kind of like,
yes, that's true, actually. There is humour in the original that wasn't humour. There.
I mean, we all laughed at that. I think the lack of humour, the lack of sex, the lack of women be given power, because you don't have Nausicaa and Queen Arate who really runs the show.
Yeah, it's interesting. My thought about Calypso was that she had become his therapist.
Yes.
That she was, tell me more about you, what you remember. Yeah, rather than someone who had a sexual relationship with him for several years. Linda, you can be our non-classicist control group in a way, because of course you are aware of the original. So it would be really interesting to hear from you what you expected to be in it that maybe was or wasn't, and what matched your expectations and what didn't.
I really liked the way Cyclops was depicted in here. I love that it was something we hadn't really seen before, and it was almost like a Goya representation. Where his eye wasn't how we were expecting it to be. I really liked the themes around this, and that Odysseus wasn't a heroic character. This is a story about someone who's racked with guilt at having had his men killed, at seeing the ravages of war, at seeing what his war resulted in.
Yeah.
I'll have to disagree about the women here because I feel like their characters were way more memorable than the men's. And I think this was a very personal representation for Nolan, and we might disagree with it, but I really like when someone goes a bit off piste rather than have the exact same adaptation. And I don't see a point in adapting things to the sort of the last detail, because there's no point. I could just go and read the Odyssey. I like it when something is adapted and is done a bit
Yeah.
out of what we expected.
Yeah, no, it has to be his vision and his version of it. When you said about the Cyclops Polyphemus, that it reminded you of Goya, you know, the image of Kronos eating his children, that famous painting of Goya flashed into my mind. And I think it was precisely based on that, actually. Debbie, what do you think?
Yes, I'd agree. I mean, I actually thought Polyphemus was really well represented as well. It was horrific. And I think, yeah, there's a nightmarish kind of Goya Fuseli, early 19th century kind of view of it. And the fact that he is powerful and they are trapped in the cave. I mean, can you imagine that? You really get a sense of that from them. And I think for me, that's when the episode works best.
No, that's true. And I also liked the fact that it took place over several days. I thought that added to the horror, and they kept having colleagues eaten bit by bit, basically.
Yeah, I had to close my eyes, I will admit. I'm not great with horror.
Right.
Friends of mine know. And I remember sitting on the chair kind of like almost like with my hand over my eyes, because you didn't see much, but you kind of heard him crunching them. And that was kind of worse. You know?
Yeah, that's true. Amanda, your world is the world of Xena and Hercules and Wonder Woman and, you know, all of that. And so in a way, you are very used to liberties being taken with the original source, and probably the finest tuned into, you know, whether something works as the result, regardless of the liberties it's taken. So I'd be very interested in your take on what of the original had been transformed in a good way and what of the original was missing.
Yeah, so I want to go back to the sex.
You always do.
Well, Odysseus was completely exonerated from having any affairs because he only went with Calypso because he lost his memory through the Lotus Eaters. What a clever use of the Lotus Eaters to do that.
Which we should say for listeners, those are two completely separate episodes in the Odyssey. Their visit to the land of the Lotus Eaters has nothing to do with Calypso. And so giving him that fruit that made him forget everything at that point does act to say he wasn't really having an affair. He just couldn't remember anything about his wife because of this magic fruit, which doesn't really stand up in the original, because he doesn't just have an affair. He sleeps with every woman he comes across, really.
Yeah, so he doesn't do that. In this film, he's faithful to Penelope. Or in theory he is. We don't see him not being. So he doesn't have an affair with Circe, he doesn't spend years with Calypso, and so he's exonerated from that. And so the film does a really good job of removing that, but also still making Odysseus an ambiguous character. So I liked the bit where he fired the arrow at Polyphemus, that he didn't need to. And one of his men said, you know what you're doing that for? Which was just completely unnecessary violence. And maybe this was the turning point for him to self-realization about how violent he'd been. But for me, that worked really much better than the joke in the Odyssey, where he calls himself nobody and then he says his name as an arrogant gesture. So for me, that kind of thing worked really well, that Odysseus worked well without the sex, because he still was ambiguous. He wasn't a brilliant hero. He had lots of flaws, but the sex bit was removed. And another ambiguous piece that was removed was the killing of the maids, the female slaves. So we saw the female slave that had been sleeping with Antinous hiding, but we don't know what happens to her at the end. So we've removed that most problematic part, which is not acceptable to any modern reader or
Yeah.
viewer. So I thought it did a good job of removing the unacceptable. So I liked it. I liked Polyphemus. I probably was brought up on the Harryhausen Cyclops from the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, who has the horn on his head, and all the changes, I think, worked fine for the film. I never have a problem with changes, and like I said, I liked the happy ending for Penelope, so it wasn't a kind of sad ending that Odysseus ends up in the future going off on his own. Actually, they both go off to have their adventures and leave the son in charge of Ithaca, which made a lot of sense. So there wasn't really any changes I didn't like. I agree with Debbie though about not including the Phaeacians was an opportunity not to include two more important women. But you have to cut some stuff out. What I was really surprised about was the battle with and I can't even say this, the kind of the warlike race that
in Greek it's Lestrigones. I couldn't even guess. Lestrigones, I guess.
Lestrigonians, I don't know, but the kind of that race. Nobody remembers that bit of the thing.
That's
of the
true.
Odyssey.
I didn't. I was really quite surprised. I thought, oh yeah, shit, that happened.
Because I was thinking, isn't this in the Argonautica? It's not in the Odyssey, is it? And then I reminded myself. And so they brought in a bit, and that was the thing on the movie poster, was that episode, which is kind of a lesser known bit, which surprised me.
Maybe that worked because they could keep the better known bits as a surprise,
yes, I
guess.
The 31st century. Ulysses killed the giant Cyclops when he rescued the children and his son Telemachus. But the ancient gods of Olympus are angry and threaten a terrible revenge.
Mortals, you defy the gods? I sentence you to travel among unknown stars. Until you find the kingdom of Hades, your bodies will stay as lifeless as stone.
Ulysses, the way back to Earth has been wiped from my memory.
What you said about the removing of the unacceptable, I think at times maybe too much of the unacceptable were removed. And I know that I was having a conversation with both Debbie and Alexandra about how the raping had been removed completely from the sacking of Troy, which was a really important part of the sacking of Troy. And really it was why the Greeks were punished in a way, because women had gone to the Temple of Athena to seek sanctuary, and they were dragged out and either taken as slaves or even sexually assaulted on the spot. And it was interesting that that had been completely removed. We saw Greek soldiers sort of grabbing very beautiful young women and sort of stabbing them or cutting their head off as they rampaged through the city. And it's like, that's not what happened, and that's not what would happen. And I wasn't sure why that aspect of the horror of war was removed from the film altogether. It's never really said that Odysseus engages in that, but having witnessed that, I think, would have increased his horror of what have I done here. What do you think, Alexandra?
There are a lot of details that could be added, like Cassandra. I didn't really grasp who was that girl that was supposed to be Athena and followed him, because Cassandra had a story that was also connected to Agamemnon, which was told during the film, but she didn't exist. And Cassandra was a very powerful personality throughout the whole thing, and she became a slave and she was slaughtered together with Agamemnon. But we cannot expect Nolan to recreate Odyssey. It's 12,000 stichi, as we call it. I mean, it's a huge poem.
And I guess the criticism here could be that there was too much story for one film. So I don't understand why he didn't make two films out of it, having gone through the effort. Surely the marginal cost of making it two films would have been not vast.
I think I only see this film as part of something that Nolan wanted to create based on a story that everybody knows. So he didn't adapt the details, he didn't bring a lot of stuff in it. So as a classicist, let's say, I wouldn't expect that because it would be boring. He should be able to create his own Odyssey. And he did that in a very brilliant way.
Alexandra, I'm so glad that you really loved it and saw it for what it is as a classicist. And I'm actually quite like so pleased to hear you say that, because it's really important to know that one adaptation doesn't mean that we have to, expect one certain adaptation to sort of represent the whole story. I think with the Athena character, who that young woman was supposed to represent, I don't think she was supposed to represent anyone in particular. That is the whole point of it. She's meant to represent the violence against women for no reason. I mean, this is a bit of a spoiler, because at the end of the movie, we realize that who he's been seeing as representing Athena, who's probably just in his own head, was this poor young woman who gets killed in front of him for absolutely no reason, because those were the days where you could lose your life over nothing. And
Yeah.
I think the representation of this young woman or young servant or young slave, we don't know who she is,
Or young priestess,
young priestess,
seeing
we
as
don't
she's...
actually know. She was just another woman, and the fact that he's had her following him through his journey, she became this person who represented his guilt
Yeah,
over what's
absolutely,
been
absolutely.
happening,
Yeah.
and I think it's really important to know that.
Debbie, I think you had some thoughts on this as well, didn't you?
The absence of sexual violence. I mean, obviously there's violence, but you don't see, not even a hint that women are raped. The young woman, priestess, possibly Cassandra, I don't know. And I don't dislike that, actually. I rather like that. But I do think, again, there's a problem with the lack of sex. That, that's a big thing in the Odyssey. And we forget the origins of the Odyssey. But if you think about the Iliad, the reason Achilles and Agamemnon fall out is because it's over basically a slave who's taken for sex. Agamemnon takes Achilles' favourite sex slave essentially from him. Women in this world are bartered. It makes Circe and Calypso inviting Odysseus to sleep with them more important for sexual pleasure, for their own sexual pleasure. And that's a foil to the sexual violence. And you get a sense that, and that's a massive difference to Agamemnon taking Cassandra from the altar of Troy.
This is where I want to come in with my big complaint. And I have to frame this. We all loved the movie. So, Linda, I want you to feel completely secure that Christopher Nolan's legacy is safe with us. We all genuinely loved the film as a film.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're allowed to make judgments about what was left out, what was left in, the artistic choices that were made, and whether those worked for you. And there were some that worked brilliantly. I love that Amanda brought up the fact that he fires an arrow into the Cyclops that was really unnecessary, and that begins to cause trouble. And I picked out another bit of the film which I had never really seen like that when I was reading the original, which was the fact he lashes himself to the mast when they're going past the sirens because he wants to hear their song. Everyone else has to block their ears, but he gets to hear the song. And in the context of the film, it's incredible how that became meaningful about the character of Odysseus, that he was really quite a selfish man that wanted to experience things that others didn't get to, and how it made the social difference between him and his crew really quite palpable. So I really liked that aspect of it. Here's the bit where it began to go slightly wrong for me. There was a choice to remove the divine element from it. And this is not a small thing. The gods are the main characters in the Odyssey and the Iliad. They're not supplementary figures that you can just then place in the fantasy of mortals. They are real. They have dialogue. They intervene directly in events. And while I understand the modern sensibility to take that out and make it a human story, it also diminishes it as a story, because the original story is in part about this palace intrigue going on in Olympus, where they're fighting with each other and using the mortals as pawns for their amusement. And when you remove that, so when you don't have this force going against Odysseus, which is present throughout his trying to get home, but his efforts are derailed by gods who decide to go against him because he doesn't deserve to get home yet. When you remove that aspect of it, it becomes a slightly lesser story about some dude who refused to ask for directions, which is in many ways the most human story of all. His shipmates even mention it. They go, "Are you sure we don't want to go the normal route?" And he was like, "Nah, I know shortcut. Don't worry about it. I'll do a bit of Zen navigation. We'll get there in no time." 10 years later, they're all dead. He gets to go home. So I think it changes the quality of the story in a way that's quite significant. And it takes away from the power of characters like Circe, characters like Calypso, which are part divine. You know, they're nymphs, they're demigods. Even Polyphemus, the Cyclops, is a demigod. And so I'm not sure that removing that element, that gutting that element of the divine from the original story worked completely. And I don't understand why that choice was made and why that choice really is made universally when it comes to Greek mythology stories told really in the last 20 years. The divine element is almost always removed and they become figments of human imagination. Greek mythology is so much about what the gods do and the gods want. So maybe Linda, as someone who's not steeped on that side of things, you have a view on that.
I do, because I think what Nolan is trying to do here is that sort of seeing it from, I think there are loads of parallels, as we said earlier, with modern America or the modern world we live now, where everything is done in the name of God, everything is done in the name of a religion, everything is done in the name of beliefs. And I think his decision is to say we are responsible for our own actions, and to sort of blame gods for what we do to each other is actually a cop out. And I actually really admire that. I think it's a really important point, and that is the reason why that aspect was completely removed from the story.
I get what you're saying, and I agree to a certain extent, but the Odyssey and the Iliad are not about people doing something in the name of a god. You know, it's not like the Crusades. The gods are central characters in it. You know, they are in the story. It's like making Game of Thrones without any magic or dragons. It's like making Thor, but really it's about an ordinary guy that has a very good hammer. It really is to gut a core part of the story, because the story is about when will he be allowed to go home rather than getting lost. Alexandra, what do you think?
I think that Nolan wanted to show human agency. He was not interested in taking the epos and directing it. He wanted to let young men think deeply what war is and what is to be in combat and what is to be human. And as Debbie said, the very human character that comes out of Odysseus, especially at this monologue at the end when he stands outside of Penelope's apartment and talks to her about what really happened in Troy and how he felt about and how he regretted all of this. And with me going twice to see the film with just a couple of days in between, the first time it was just to enjoy the film and see how Nolan presented it. But the second time, it felt, because there was so little light, and that's something we discussed with Alex, the fact that it was so gray, it gave me a kind of impression that this was the depressed character of Odysseus that was trying to understand what has really happened to me through these years that I've been wandering around the world after killing so many people and being the main reason that Troy was devastated.
Yeah. How about you, Debbie? What did you feel about the removal of the divine?
I agree that it's a problem. I mean, I can't help but think of, Harryhausen and actually Laurence Olivier and Maggie Smith and that idea of
Yeah,
the gods.
on that chessboard. I think that is the most accurate representation of Greek mythology to this day. Them picking out pieces from a wall of heroes and monsters and putting them on a chessboard and saying, let's see how your fella deals with this one.
I think it's difficult because part of the problem with looking at Greek mythology and Greek religion in the modern world is always the nature of the divine and what they believe, because it's so different to Judeo-Christian belief systems that actually is human agency, despite the gods, throwing a storm at them. Because, actually part of the reason Odysseus takes so long to get home is because he blinded and goaded Polyphemus. It's not just the blinding, it's the goading of him afterwards. And so Poseidon and Athena, Zeus is like, well, no, he's done something really stupid. You've got to let Poseidon have his way.
Yeah.
So there is still human agency. And that's what's so hard, I think, philosophically for us to grasp, especially perhaps in a humanist age. We tend to look up to the Greeks as being humanist like us, if you see what I mean, if you're not religious. But actually they had beliefs in the divine, and they often differed. I remember when I produced a Greek tragedy, when I was at university, Women of Troy, because I knew exactly how I wanted to do the women and depict them, but I wasn't sure how to do the gods at the beginning, because it's really tricky, because they have this conversation, but you have to do it in some way, even if it's not as big as having a chessboard. I think there has to be some sense of belief, because you don't really what's the point of having Zeus's law if you're not really sure who Zeus is?
I loved the bits about Zeus's law.
Yeah, so did I.
We are doing an episode in a couple of months about xenia, about this concept of hospitality, and that you are kind to strangers, you are kind to refugees, you are kind to immigrants, because they could be a god in disguise testing you. And I think that's one of the most important and under-discussed concepts in antiquity. So I was really glad that it was so present in all aspects of this film.
But then it's a shame that Athena isn't in disguise, because she's a shape-shifting goddess, and the fact is that you do have Zeus's law in the film, of course. So that's really fundamental point of the film, and that's something I really enjoy.
But no Zeus.
But you don't have Athena in disguise as a beggar or an old man or a slave woman, or and there's not a mysterious character that's reappearing all the time as somebody who is in need of that hospitality.
So what Telemachus kept harping on about, though, was Mentor could have been Athena, and comparing him to Athena. And although I agree with everything you say, and I'd have liked to have seen the gods, and I do think it's a big miss when there's no gods in something, it made more sense actually than the Athena character that was a figment of the... So I really liked the Athena character until I realised that she wasn't really Athena. But then Telemachus says that Mentor could have been Athena, or that's why it's Zeus's law, because he, and he's got the eyes that could, I can't remember all the words, but he has this thing because he's wise, it could be her all along. And that kind of felt a bit out of place with the rest of it, but that did bring that concept in slightly for anybody who knew what he was talking about.
As I said, as an independent piece of cinema, I absolutely loved it. I would give it 9.5 out of 10. But there has been a sort of pushback from Greece, albeit it has been funneled into really ugly culture wars and anti-woke channels, and really centered on the casting of a black actress as Helen of Troy and Zendaya as Athena, which she's not in the film. So to make that complaint, you'd have to actually not have seen the movie. But I think there is something real behind that complaint. It's just that people in this polarized environment have gone to the easy place of saying it was woke. I think the exclusion of Greek people from the project, I think it had an effect. Disney is a very successful company. Disney makes a lot of money. And when it introduced what it calls those cultural sensitivity panels, so when they make a film about Moana, they have a panel of people who are from those islands and understand the music and the art and the colors and the legends of those islands. When they make Coco, they have a cultural sensitivity panel that understands Mexican tradition and the Dia de los Muertos and all of that, in order to course correct them when they go wrong. And I think Nolan, by not having any Greek people involved, this is not a complaint from an ethno-nationalist point of view. I don't think Greeks own this story. This story belongs to everyone. But I thought by not having Greek people involved, who have grown up in that geographical location, who have grown up with these stories, who have studied them at school in the original language, and they've been part of our lives for a very long time, I thought it uprooted the story from Greece. So the only thing that genuinely annoyed me about the film is that it felt Nordic or Celtic or Icelandic. Everything about the soundscape, the dark, grey, musty atmosphere said to me Game of Thrones or Norse mythology. There was nothing that rooted it in its geographical location. I would have liked to have seen some light and shade. And that is a complaint that I have a lot with Nolan in the first place. I think his Batman movies are a bit too designer bleak. There is again no light and shade. It really struck home when they visited Hades. There was no difference between the environment they normally occupied and Hades. They didn't go from a place of light and blue sea into a place of dark water and shadows. They went from a foggy, dank place that could have been the English Channel to a slightly foggier place. And that, I think, was the only genuine bum note of the film, that he made the story universal by uprooting it from the place where it was born. And I didn't understand that choice. I know you all broadly disagree with me.
I don't entirely disagree. I would say, for me, that wine dark sea, Eastern Mediterranean, the colour of the Eastern Mediterranean is not in it. And I do think there is a kind of Lord of the Rings feel over it. I do think it is Nordic in feel sometimes. I do think I noticed, for example, some of the pottery that was used was Greek and actually geometric Greek. So I kind of get what you're saying. I think part of it is the look of Christopher Nolan films. So I'm not sure it's entirely to do with the lack of Greeks in production. What I would say, though, is it's part and parcel of how, I would say, particularly Northwest European and American culture, takes Greek myths and history, but it's much more about America today than it is Greece.
Yeah, I don't doubt that, but that's part of a general pattern of seeing those stories as everyone's, and sometimes seeing those stories as everyone's comes perilously close to seeing those stories as yours.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an exclusionary thing.
There is a difference between the West seeing those stories as everyone's and the West seeing those stories as the West's, to the exclusion of the Eastern Mediterranean. Amanda, I know you have to leave us now because you have a hard stop. So can I take your thoughts on this and then say goodbye and thank you?
So I guess I'm so used to this kind of aesthetic that it's what I expect from the cinema. Everything's got a lot darker. I would harken back to the days of Xena when things were a little bit campier and funny and bright. Yes, and if you think of, and I wanted to watch it again actually before we talked, but that miniseries with Armand Assant of the Odyssey, and the campiness of that. And I remember Hermes just looked absolutely ridiculous, but there's something quite fun about that. And like the sirens in Xena and the Ulysses episode, which isn't great, but it's very camp. And so I miss the bright colours and the gods and the campiness, but actually everything's grim dark now. And so we're used to that aesthetic. But what I did want to go and revisit actually was the music, because the music was so dark. There was nothing lyrical here for me. And I'm not much of a musicologist, and often I don't notice the music until like a third watching of a film. But halfway through, I thought, this is just watching it in the cinema with that loud loud sound. I thought, this is just loud sound in my head. There's not music. It's not musical at all. And surely the Odyssey is musical and there's musicality about it. So not tied to Greekness, but tied to how we would expect this world to be.
Yes, I think that's a really astute observation. It had the music of the epic slightly wrong.
Yeah.
The tune and rhythm of it were slightly off because it had been made Icelandic or whatever. So on that, thank you for joining us, Amanda, and we'll speak again very soon.
Yeah, thank you. Lovely to spend time with you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
At first sight, you look at the poem and it feels very alien. It feels of another time, another society. You're very conscious of the differences. And then as you engage with the text and as you engage with the story, suddenly you start to realize that no, nothing's changed. These are primal, elemental storytelling things and ideas about society. And that's why Homer sustains. In adapting it, you start unpacking the mechanism, you start unpacking the story modules, models, and the tropes. And of course, as a filmmaker, what you suddenly realize is everything I've done in the past that I thought was stunningly original, all the rest, all derives from Homer, from the Odyssey.
Now, Linda, I know you have strong views on this.
On the way the movie looks, firstly, I have to say I agree with you, and I think if I were Greek or of Greek descent, I'd be slightly miffed that no Greeks were used in the making of this movie, as it were. But having said that, I understand the reason why it is so dark. I feel like this is a much darker Odyssey, therefore it needed a darker it needed to be seen as a darker movie. I don't know why we all suddenly associate dark cinematography with seriousness. I think that needs to stop. It feels a bit redundant. However, I understand where it was. This is due mostly to the cinematographer that Nolan loves to work with, and that he's a Dutch cinematographer called Hoyte van Hoytema.
That name sounds completely made up, by the way.
Yeah.
It sounds like Boaty McBoatface.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and he worked with him on Dunkirk, and he worked with him on Interstellar.
Interesting, because I thought the whole of the Odyssey had a Dunkirk feel to it, which was wrong for the Odyssey, so that was my issue.
Yeah.
Interstellar, it was notable that what took place in happier times or in happier places was actually very bright and washed with sunlight.
Yeah, had this kind of lighter sheen.
That's what I missed.
Yeah.
At no point did I see the blue of the sea that I see in Greece. At no point did I see the light that I see in the Mediterranean.
No, I agree.
Even in the sort of idealized bit of his return to Ithaca, I would have liked to have seen a glimpse of coming home to this place that was different from Hades. But instead it was all sort of color graded in the same way post-production. And I know I was talking with Alexandra, like, why did he use the Greek locations if he would then go away post-production and color grade them as if this had been filmed in Norway?
I think sometimes when you've been working with certain people for a very long time, I think there is that kind of like almost like a blindness of seeing what we see. Nolan has got so used to working with these people who sort of allow him to produce his vision that and no, I agree with you on that instance. I have to say I do agree with you. I think it needed to be lighter when things were deserved to be light, and darker as in Hades and for those spaces. Yeah.
Alexandra, I know you loved the film and you think he should be allowed to make his own version of it. But what do you think of that specific point? Did you recognize Greece in the film? Because that was the bit that, they made this whole effort of going to Greece, of finding the actual cave that they think was the cave of the Cyclops in Pylos, etc., etc. But it could have been anywhere because there was nothing of the air and color and soundscape of the Eastern Mediterranean in there. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I really agree. And that was, in a way, a question: why did he do that? Because I've heard an interview about how he did the whole thing and the methods that he has used, and how difficult it was for these actors that would be totally wiped out every day after the filming inside that particular cave, which was, by the way, the cave of Zeus outside Pylos. So all of that, why did he actually go there? And I think it's because of respect, but I agree with Linda that just because he's Nolan and he has his signature in a way in his films, he couldn't put the light, because this light of the Aegean is totally different than the quality that he has in his own films. So maybe the fact that he didn't involve Greek people, which I think it's a bit overrated, and especially by Greeks and all these nationalistic movements and whatever, we're not going to go into that. But the fact that he actually went to Greece and people would see the crew and they would meet the people, and he paid, in a way, a respect to the place.
That's one reading of it. Another reading of it is that that was his alibi for doing whatever he wanted with the story, to say, look, I went to Greece and filmed it all, so what's your problem? Like I said, I don't subscribe to this ethno-nationalistic ideas that you can't cast a black person as Helen of Troy. You know, the whole thing about, I mean, Helen of Troy hatches out of an egg. You know, she's a character that is conceived by her mother and Zeus as a swan and comes out of an egg. So the notion that you have particular ideas about what she should look like is a nonsense. The whole point about Helen and her sister Clytemnestra is that they look very striking, very unusual. And I thought he did that brilliantly by casting Lupita Nyong'o in the part. So my issue is not with the narrow nativist point of it. This story does not belong to modern Greece. However, it does also belong to modern Greece. And that is an important point to make. It belongs to everyone, including Greece. It doesn't belong to the West, excluding Greece. And there was something about it, something about the exclusion of anyone Greek from the project, that felt like he would have more freedom to do whatever he wanted to the story by not including the sort of cultural sensitivity panel that Disney do. But it's my view, the film could have gained from someone to course correct him a little bit and get him out of his Christopher Nolan habits for making everything dank and musty. But that's just my view. Debbie, I know you also had thoughts about the casting of Helen of Troy and the sort of furore that's caused, because we were discussing how the entire crew of his ship was cast with blind casting. You know, it included East Asian actors, it included South Asian actors, it included Scandinavians, black people, you know, and no one complained about that. And yet everyone feels like they own Helen of Troy. Why is that?
Because that's the story of Helen of Troy, I think. That's the whole point, is you don't know who she is. I mean, you know, I think that's exactly it.
She's still being fought over.
She totally is. I think that is the thing. You know, even in the ancient world, you know, Euripides had this phantom Helen who was in Egypt and didn't go to the Trojan War. You know, she's never been agreed upon. The face that launched 1,000 ships comes from Christopher Marlowe, doesn't come from, you know, obviously anything in the ancient world. And so, you know, I think part of it is a sense of an ideal of beauty, which is based on whiteness and based on Greek sculpture and white nationalist takes on Greek sculpture. And that's been something that's been talked about and discussed for particularly the last decade, particularly the MAGA movement. And I think it's just racism. Ultimately, there's a kind of perception that a black woman cannot be the most beautiful woman on earth. Well, it's not, as you said, it's not necessarily about beauty. It's about looking slightly unusual.
Looking unique.
Yeah, looking unique. But so I think that's part of it for sure.
And I'm sure Alexandra will back me up when I say that when you look at Attic pottery, whether red figure or black figure pottery, their faces are kept either in the color of the general pottery, or they're made very white, or they're made very black. And what that is meant to do is create contrast in the ensemble. So it is to distinguish the male hero from the female priestess, let's say. And so the ancient Greeks were not fussy about what color they gave people's skin, because they understood the overall artistic aim was to create an interesting ensemble that you represented on the vase. And Christopher Nolan did exactly the same thing. The way he cast the film, he created an interesting ensemble where you didn't have to keep going, who's that again? Because otherwise, if you put 50 white American blokes with big beards in helmets and stick them on the ship, you won't know who is who. It's very clever to cast people differently in order for them to be recognizable by the audience. At a very basic level, it creates contrast.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think it's interesting that Elon Musk has today announced that he's going to make an historically accurate Odyssey, or Grok is.
Oh my God.
And you kind of, yeah, seriously.
Oh my God.
I know.
I'm gonna die.
I literally... But doesn't that sum it up, though?
That's hilarious.
It's never going to be better than Christopher Nolan's Odyssey.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be catastrophically bad.
Yeah.
Let him make it. Let him make it. See who he will cast. I mean...
And see who will go to watch it,
Nobody will
Linda,
watch it.
because bots don't buy tickets.
Exactly. When it comes to sort of hearing the kind of like far right incels revolting over a movie, they rarely make a difference. Very, very, very rarely. And usually a movie flops because it's a bad movie. I think I chose to completely ignore what they have to say.
Yeah.
I have zero interest in their opinion. They wouldn't have gone and seen a movie based on the Odyssey.
Yeah. And clearly from the complaints, they haven't seen this one.
Exactly. So, and also Nolan has a big following even on the right, because loads of these kind of gamers are massive Nolan fans, and they've gone and seen the movie and they love it. So,
Alexandra, I want to give you the last word, because you were saying something to me a few days ago that I think is very relevant to this idea of Elon Musk making a historically accurate version of the Odyssey, because you were pointing out to me that there is no one version of the Odyssey.
Well, that would be a whole podcast by itself, or maybe a series. It has been debated for so long. And no, we don't have. We have bits and pieces from here and there.
Talking about fragments of the Odyssey, I just want to mention that Manchester has its own Odyssey. So there's a fragment actually on display at John Rylands Library.
Wow.
With an exhibition about exactly what you were just talking about, how these things came together. And it's one of the earliest fragments on papyri that we have of the Odyssey, because of course Manchester is the centre of the world now.
Yeah.
I thought Debbie put it wonderfully with the colours that they used to have both on the statues and the temples, which is totally gone because of that pure white marble that is used everywhere. And also Linda put it wonderfully about the extreme far right. And I was thinking while you were talking about all that, how many horrible movies have already been done from Hollywood about ancient Greek mythology? And how many more, if that Odyssey of Nolan will become a commercial success, we're going to have a wave of series and films that are going to be totally horrible.
Well, maybe some of them will be good. Maybe some of them will be good. And I guess...
I really hope, because it's going to be...
And you know what? I guess to close it, to wrap this up, because we have spent a little bit of time on criticisms of the film, which are minor, I hasten to add, but they are of interest to our particular audience, because the classics are of interest to our particular audience, and the mythology of it is of interest to our particular audience. And what I want to say is that for me, there's a very basic distinguishing characteristics between the films about ancient Greece that I love and the films about ancient Greece that I don't like, and that is whether it's made with a love for those stories. So if I look at something like Troy, to me, that's made as a commercial vehicle. It's a way to monetize. It could be any story, any script. It could be generated by ChatGPT. It's made with no love for the story. Nolan clearly has a lot of love for these stories, even though it may misfire in particular ways because he has a very Western aesthetic of it. He does have a love for these stories, same as Harryhausen did. And that, I think, is why I like those films, even though they take horrible liberties with the mythological basis of this story. But it's done with a huge affection for that mythology, with a huge affection for those stories. And I think that's the distinguishing difference. So as a Greek and a person interested in the classics and a person interested in mythology, my only plea is, if you decide to make a film about a story from a particular place in the world, make it with real affection for the story, for the place, for the people of that place, rather than using it as a basis for your own either profit motives or vanity projects. If you do that, you can't go wrong as far as I'm concerned, because I will never distrust your motives. I will look at it and I will think, not particularly on board with this bit, I really love that thing, but the underlying intention will always be respect for these stories that we all love so much. So with that, can I say thank you so much to everyone. I will edit this together and put it out in the next couple of days, and hopefully people can derive as much pleasure from it as I did from this conversation. So thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And it's lovely to have you back on the
Oh,
podcast.
thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
And thank you, Alexandra.
Thank you very much. It was really nice to talk with you all.
Yeah, it was lovely. Thank you again for joining us. The next episode coming up will be a Storytime special on Erigone, a neglected but incredible myth that contains everything from the introduction of wine to humanity, the provenance of the constellation Virgo, and even the origin story of swings. Oh, and this one is definitely not safe for work. The next full episode will be the week after that, on Alcestis, who takes her husband's place in Hades, until Hercules comes along and wrestles death for her release. Wowzers. An enormous amount of work goes into this project that would simply not have been possible without its paying supporters. As a thank you, each week that follows a full episode offers a live online event for paying supporters, a Zoom session in which you get to quiz both me and the show's experts on any aspect of the latest episodes. You will also get an illustrated guide to each topic with a lot of the art we discuss, links to the music, interesting essays, book and film recommendations, and occasional surprises. To get all of that, log on to ko-fi.com/Podyssey and become a monthly subscriber for as little as $5, making sure the system has the right contact email for you. If you cannot afford to subscribe, or you cannot make it to a particular Q&A, worry not, each of those sessions will be released as an audio episode a few days later. And please spread the word. Podyssey is an audio production for cooler heads, written and presented by me, Alexandrou. For an illustrated guide and an invite to the live Q&A for each episode, sign up now at ko-fi.com/Podyssey. Creative input, sage advice and expert contributions by 4 goddesses who inexplicably continue to make time for this hapless bard: Alexandra Angelataki-Rö, Debbie Chalice, Amanda Potter and Dr. Ruth Smith. Music by Mariana Sangita, artwork by Simona Canelu, additional research by Cosman Zakos. Alex Andreou's Podyssey is a Cooler Heads podcast.